Okay, guys, it's time to start with the memoir essay. The essay should be a minimum of 900 words. It should be in MLA format. It should reflect an important event in your life, typically taking place in no more than 5 minutes. You should include a lot of sensory details, sight, sound, taste, smell, feel, and you should conclude the essay with what important lesson you learned from it. I'm going to talk to you today about my experience, my life-changing experience when my first calculus class when I was a math major. So it's about when I was a freshman in college. I was a math major. My calculus class was in a huge auditorium with 350 other students. I was from a small town and I wasn't used to being in that kind of class before. When I opened my first test, I had a full-on panic attack, which I'd never had before, and my mind went completely blank. The next day, when I saw the grades posted on my professor's door, I had made the lowest score, 34%. So this was sort of the horrible experience and how I guess it changed my life. Hopefully it'll help you. What happened was that night I'd spent hours on my calculus homework. One problem in particular took 4 hours. And the next day when I sat in class trying to be invisible, the professor asked for volunteers to work that specific problem. And it turns out I was the only one who had done it correctly. So I got to go down in front of everybody in the auditorium and solve the problem on those big blackboards that they used to have. And as I say, it was a great experience. It turned out to be the last time I felt good about a career in math. In spite of my ultimate failure as a math major, the experience proved to me that if I don't give up, I could find the answer to a problem, and that not all answers come easily. So, to start my essay, I want to focus on that moment when I realized that I was the only one who knew the answer. And I want to include as many sensory sight, sound, smell, touch, taste details as I can. This is a rough draft, so don't judge. I squirmed in my seat as a teacher glared at the auditorium full of nervous students. He scanned the room looking for anyone who had successfully worked problem number 18 from last night's homework. I looked around at my fellow sufferers who were trying to avoid making eye contact with the stern man in the front of the class. I felt clammy and nauseous and wondered if I were coming down with something. Finally, after what seemed as if an hour had dragged by, I tentatively raised my hand. The professor looked in my direction. I wasn't even sure he was talking to me, and said, "Let's see what you have." I made my way down to the front of the auditorium, trying not to trip on my own 2 feet. The room was deadly silent. I could smell the overused Polo men's cologne from the fraternity boys who always sat together. It was the same as high school all over again. Popular guys interested in me for my math homework. It almost made me laugh. As I stood in front of the 6 enormous blackboards, I felt about as small as I had ever felt. I picked up a piece of chalk and slowly worked the problem from start to finish. All I could hear was the scratching of the chalk and my beating heart. When I finished, I turned around to look at the professor, hoping for some sort of validation. Instead, he had already moved on to the next problem, and I knew I was dismissed to walk back to my seat, a seat that seemed a million miles away. At this point, then, you would go back to sort of a flashback of how you ended up there in the first place. This entire experience was so unlikely because just the day before, I had failed the first major exam spectacularly. I had been so nervous about the test, I had way overstudied for it, and when I sat down to open the test booklet, I had my first panic attack. My mind had gone completely blank, and I could not remember how to solve any of the problems I had had down cold the night before. I remember looking around the room at the rest of the class, silently focused on the exam. I had never felt so alone or so inadequate. For the first time, I truly appreciated what most students go through when they are asked to perform a difficult task. It was both humbling and frightening. That afternoon, when I went to see the scores posted on my teacher's door, my heart sank as I realized that I had made the lowest score on the test. That was the first test in my major. I had no idea what my future career would be. That night, as I struggled through 4 hours of calculus homework, I rehearsed the conversation I would have with my parents about changing my major. Being the only one in the class who was able to solve the hardest problem gave me the courage to stay in the class and in my major for at least 2 more semesters. But that experience of knowing the answer was my last good moment in calculus. I finished the semester with my first D. I took calculus again the next semester, but my heart wasn't in it. Even though most people would consider the overall experience a failure, I learned a lot about myself from that day in that class. Through the years, I've had many successes as an English major teacher, but that day still stands out as a life-changing moment. I had never before experienced such an academic failure, and yet I was able to prove to myself that I could still get up and fight another day. I've been able to call upon that moment when I have been confronted with overwhelming tasks, most recently when I had to empty out my house after it was flooded with 11 feet of water after Hurricane Katrina. As you can see, this rough draft is not long enough or has nearly enough details. It's a rough draft, a start. The assignment for this essay, including the rubric, is under the essay tab under Memoir Rough Draft. There are also examples of memoirs included in the tab. Please feel free to call or text or email if you have any questions about this assignment. I cannot wait to read your essays.